Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for participating this evening. After nearly a decade of research and planning, right, trees are finally coming to frontage road in just a few weeks. We'll see planting starting, and Prescott Greening is a community-driven experiment in green design, clean air, and environmental justice. What makes this as significant as it is that for decades, West Oakland has been at the crossroads of highways, the Port of Oakland, rail lines, and heavy industry. What that's meant is that our community has carried a disproportionate pollution burden, while others have benefited from the flow of goods and commerce that moves through our neighborhoods. Not only do we have frontage road and the 880 that brings thousands of vehicles and diesel trucks past Prescott or through the Prescott neighborhood every single day, we also have the Port of Oakland as one of the busiest ports on the West Coast. And while that's extremely vital to our regional economy, it's a major source of emissions. Historically, West Oakland was zoned for industrial use and bisected by freeways that physically and environmentally divided the community. And with that framing in mind, I'm going to hand it over to May Visco from Hyphy Design Labs to start the presentation and get us going, right? This project is a collaboration between WOAP and Hyphy Design Lab. And the central question that is being answered is whether or not planting a dense buffer of trees and vegetation along frontage road will reduce emissions and exposure to the residents that live in the Prescott neighborhood.
Hi, everybody. I'm May. I'm a designer and project manager for Hyphy Design Laboratory. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Nicole, did you want to give some context on this first slide, or have you already given context?
I think I've given enough context.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to present this work that we've been doing. And so here is the agenda of what I'll be talking about today. I see some of the people here have been in some of our meetings before, so I apologize if some of this is retreading some old ground. I have a lot to cover, but I'm going to pause so that you can ask any questions that come up. And when something comes up, you can always write down the slide number and we can return to the slide and talk about it. First, I'm going to be introducing this project, how this got started and why. Then we'll briefly talk about the project area, so the physical location of the project. Then I'm going to explain vegetative buffers and how those impact pollution. Then I'm going to be talking about the pollution modeling that we did for this project and what the results of those were. Then I'll be talking about the project plan for the plantings that we're going to be doing really soon. And then I'll be talking about the development of some of the road designs that we've been working on. So West Oakland is home to the 6th largest port in the US. And once a huge shipment gets to Oakland, all those products have to be moved somehow. And so they end up getting loaded on trucks and onto the railways to get transported. That ends up having a huge impact on the people who live here. Diesel emissions in West Oakland are 5 times higher than the rest of the city. And children who live in West Oakland are 7 times as likely to be hospitalized for asthma as children in other places in Oakland. So this issue did not go unnoticed. California passed Assembly Bill 617, and this bill chooses neighborhoods in California with unequal exposure to air pollution. And they were given assistance with creating a plan for how to reduce air pollution. So West Oakland was one of the first neighborhoods that was chosen. And the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, WOAP, you're familiar probably at this point, and the Bay Area Air District worked together to hold community meetings with community members and local government agencies in order to create the West Oakland Community Action Plan that identifies 89 different ways that pollution strategies the pollution can be reduced in the neighborhood. So strategy 12 of these 89 solutions was for a greening project to be built between the 880 freeway and the Prescott neighborhood. Strategy 16 was for the city and the air district to assist in studying how vegetative buffers can be used to block air pollution. So the Prescott greening project is what came out of that. The goal for this project is to model different greening solutions, use those models to design a project. Then we want to build that project and monitor the air quality to see how well it's working. And hopefully the results could be used to design future projects in Oakland or in other cities with similar problems. Here is the map of the neighborhood and the 3 possible locations where projects can be built. The red zone is the Prescott impact area, the area we're hoping to have improved air quality after our projects. The yellow is the area along the freeway, and the blue is Frontage Road and 7th, where we could do a road diet. And finally, the teal is the plantable area along Frontage Road. So here's another view of those project areas. First, there's this zone along frontage, which is the immediately plantable. We're calling it that because we can plant things right away. There's open soil, there's already water hookups, even if those water hookups do need some repair, and you don't have to do a lot of construction to make this possible. This area runs from 7th Street, and there's a lot of places along the road where trees can be added or dying trees can be replaced. The yellow zone is the area along the 880 freeway, which is managed by Caltrans. So that's the California Department of Transportation. And they basically manage all the highways and freeways in California. I'm not going to be going into a ton of detail about this area today, but we are trying to work with Caltrans to plant here in the future. And then along the road, the frontage road where 7th meets frontage, we are exploring the idea of a more complex redesign that would require much more significant changes. 7th Street dips down under the 880 freeway and frontage dips down here to meet 7th Street. Here we are looking up from 7th Street up frontage, and frontage road has high walls on either side of it, and then it rises up. Then it has very large roads with lanes and big shoulders. And as we go north, the road runs along the freeway on one side and new housing developments on the other side. But if it's a roadway, how do you add vegetation? Well, we'd like to propose a road diet on frontage. Road diets are when you reduce the number of lanes and the sizes of those lanes in order to slow cars down and get people to pay attention. Technically, the speed limit on frontage road is 35 miles an hour. But having driven on this road, I'm pretty sure no one goes 35. It seems like people are mostly going 40 and 50, and there are definitely accidents here as a result. So those lanes are really wide, and it has a middle lane that's mostly unused in some places. And so if you reduce the size of those lanes and maybe have one lane going in each direction, you can use that additional space for planting area. I'm going to talk a lot more about what that could look like in the next section, but the question that we had after looking at these different planting areas was, would a vegetated buffer in any of these areas impact pollution? And does a vegetative buffer in one of these possible areas have more of an impact than a different area? So in order to study that, we wanted to model the area. But first, what are the vegetative buffers that we want to model? So I just want to really quickly talk about how trees can be used to intercept pollution. We know that trees have some effect on people's respiratory health. For example, there was a study done on what happened when an invasive bug killed trees here in the US. The emerald ash borer is a little bug originally from Asia and Russia that's somehow got transported to the US, and its larvae bore into ash trees, which kills them. So since it was first detected in the US in 2002, it has killed tens of millions of ash trees. And researchers found that in counties where more ash trees had been killed, there have been more cardiovascular related deaths. So in the 15 states where they studied this, the borer was associated with more than 20,000 additional deaths. So we know that vegetation has an effect in general, but what we want to do is plant specific trees in specific ways in order to most effectively stop pollution. We are designing vegetative buffers, which are really thick walls of trees. The EPA has published several papers about what makes the most effective vegetative buffer design. A lot of these things are pretty intuitive. The buffer needs to be long so that the pollution doesn't just blow around it. It should be at least 4 meters high, which is about 13 feet, so that it doesn't just blow over it. And it needs to not have a bunch of gaps in it because the pollution will just blow through the gaps. It also should be thick in order to be effective. There's also a difference between the types of trees that we want to use. We like evergreen trees because they don't lose their leaves, so they can capture pollution year round. When a tree is thick and dense with a lot of little needles, like a Christmas tree, it also actually has more overall surface area than when a tree has flat leaves. So there's a lot more spots for pollution particles to get stuck on. So we actually measured the surface area of leaves for a bunch of different species so that we could input that information into our model. Data has also shown that the closer to the source of pollution your buffer is, the more effective it is. It's kind of like how if you stand close to a sprinkler, you're going to block more of that water than if you were standing further away from it. So here are some of the key things to remember about vegetative buffers. You want it to be tall and thick. You want evergreen trees with dense leaves, and you want them close to the source of pollution. So before we moved on, I wanted to give folks a chance to think about this place. How do you use frontage road? What are your concerns with the area? And yeah. Also, if anyone has any questions, I can answer questions.
I think a good place to start would be how many folks actually use frontage road for walking or running or biking? Is it a preferred path in its current state? What about driving? Like, what is the experience that folks have when they access frontage road? I use it regularly, and I know many of you do. What is that like? Go for it, Marcus.
Well, no, I didn't raise my hand to speak. I raised my hand to say, yes, I use it.
Can I ask you what that's like?
It's actually rough, and looking at what's been presented so far, that's great for plants, but I don't see anything that's going to mitigate the trucks that park in the center divider area. I don't see or haven't heard anything about the speeding, which is the reason why the Prescott Neighborhood Council got involved with frontage road in discussions with the port and the city of trying to do something to reduce the accidents and deaths. So I know even trying to use it, turning onto it sometimes can be very difficult. And if there's a truck parked right there in the center, now it's created a blind spot.
Absolutely.
You can't see oncoming traffic. So that's my comment, since you forced me to say something, Nicole.
And I appreciate that you did speak. Right. There is currently a lack of enforcement on frontage road. Paul, I see your hand.
Oh, actually, I think Radia was before me.
Okay, Radia, go for it. And thank you for joining.
You're muted, Radia.
Sorry about that. So Radia Victor, Port of Oakland, just wanted to say I think that's excellent comments that Marcus Johnson raised. I just wanted to ask May if she could show the map to show. I don't know if Marcus and members of the communities were aware that the city did install center lane delineators in response to the community's concerns about trucks parking in the center median. So I just wanted to make sure that the community was aware that that was like a near-term implement, kind of like a corrective action that has been in place for a little while now. So I don't know. I know you posted you shown a picture in your presentation, so it might be helpful just to pull that up again, just so members of the community could see.
And so I'm gonna respond. This is Marcus Johnson. I'm gonna respond to that. Yes, we are aware of the delineators. We actually was in the process when the city provided money to the Department of Transportation to install those delineators. But what we're finding is trucks are parking between the delineators. And it can be actually, again, creating the blind spots. And there's no enforcement. We was also promised some enforcement.
Well, that's excellent. That's excellent feedback. I don't think I had heard that trucks were still parking in between the delineators. I don't think anyone from ODOT is on the call this evening. And I don't know, Marcus, if there's someone in particular at the city that you're working with, but that's definitely something that I think we should raise. Maybe there's another layer of delineators. It seems like there's something that can be done to kind of mitigate that.
Thank you, Radia. Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Thanks, May. My name's Paul Souza. I live in the neighborhood, live on Pullman Way, which actually looks out onto Frontage Road. So it's in my backyard. Pretty familiar with it. Let's see, there were a couple of questions raised. To answer Nicole's question, I do not use it for pedestrian reasons, just because it feels really unsafe and it's scary, and vehicles speed at, actually, I think police had one of those things to track the speed of vehicles, and I think it showed that some vehicles were going over 70 miles per hour. So yeah, I think that the median, the average might be closer to like 50, 60, but there are some that go even faster than that. There have been deadly crashes in the past involving trucks and stuff. So yeah, it's just not very inviting, even though it could potentially be a more direct route to get to 7th. Or to West Grand. Don't use it for those reasons. I do use it with my vehicle, and again, do see it from my home, so I'm pretty familiar with it. Very supportive of greening, very supportive of road diet. With regard to trucks, I think they are a big problem. The plastic delineators have helped some. Trucks are still bad actors. They sometimes let their vehicles idle. They still cross over the delineators, park in the median, just go right over them. I think, frankly, they should be banned from frontage road. This was a formerly industrial area. It has been transformed into residential. The zoning has been updated as such. They have Maritime Road. They've been given a ton of, land area for the port. Go use that area. Go create more road access if you need over there. I think ban them from frontage road would be the more appropriate response. But I think at the bare minimum, we should absolutely be doing a road diet and make the road a bit more pedestrian friendly.
I appreciate that, Paul. Thank you so much for saying that and proposing that solution to a decades-long problem. Marcus?
I agree with Paul, and there's definitely a need for a road diet, but again, there's no enforcement. And I think anyone that's traveled that road probably noticed the speed limit is posted on the West Grand side and on the 7th Street, and nothing in the middle. I think additional signage would be helpful in trying to mitigate the speeding, because I heard a number 40 and 50 miles an hour. No, it's actually 60 and 70 miles an hour that's occurring. So that's my comment.
When we send out our update, I will find out who from the city and who from the port residents should be reaching out to and who is responsible for signage. If it's the Port of Oakland or OCDOT or Caltrans, right? And Radia, if you happen to know that, that would be helpful. If not, I'm happy to figure that out after this call.
Yes, we previously worked very closely with OakDOT signage team for the installation of any new signs in accordance with the no parking ordinance, etc.
Thank you. May, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the feedback and the comments, and yeah, people definitely are going pretty fast along that road. Okay, so I'm going to carry on. All right, so next I want to explain how we modeled these project areas. I am going to get into the road diet designs a little later on, and I'm hoping that based on the feedback that you guys are excited about them. But first I just wanted to explain kind of how we got to the designs that we had, and we used our models to try to refine our designs. So we use models because we can compare our designs before we build them, which can save a lot of time and resources. So what is modeling? Modeling is basically a mathematical way of predicting how you think something will happen using the information that you have about the world. So the type of modeling most people are familiar with is weather predictions. When they want to predict the weather, they are going to take a bunch of inputs like the intensity of sunlight, the topography of the area, and how wind is moving, how water evaporates, and then they use that information to create predictions. But weather predictions aren't always right, are they? And that's something really important to emphasize. The modeling we're trying to do is a lot like predicting the weather. The information you get is a useful tool, but we have to keep in mind that modeling an outcome isn't the same as measuring that outcome. Modeling can't replace measuring, but it can do some things that measuring can't. The thing models allow us to do is compare options before using a lot of resources to build the full-size version. So one of the reasons, for example, that the Wright brothers were able to successfully build the first airplane was that they developed different ways to test smaller versions of wing shapes instead of just trying to build a bunch of full-sized versions. So we know generally where we want to have interventions. It's the areas with higher pollution exposure. And we want to design a vegetative buffer that will block pollution and then see how effective it'll be. So to do that, we need to build a model of the physical environment, input pollution sources and levels, and figure out how the pollution will move through the physical environment. And once we have that, we can change a variable to see how it will affect the movement of pollution. In this case, we're testing different tree buffer designs and then comparing which ones work best. First, we build a digital model of the Prescott neighborhood. We used LiDAR to scan the neighborhood, which gives us a 3D map of the urban environment. There are a lot of different objects we want to pick up, like buildings, the West Oakland BART track, bridges, and trees. This is how we do LiDAR scans. We use a scanner that can be mounted on a car or a backpack, and then we scan the places we're interested in. People also do LiDAR scans from planes, and we can use that data too. And then we take those scans and we create a simplified version of everything for our model. We do that because even when it's simplified, these things are really computationally intensive. So once we run the model, it will typically take a few days of a computer running constantly for us to get the results. Then we need to figure out what the pollution sources are and how much pollution is coming from these sources. So when making the model, or really any project, it's really important to look at the work other people have been doing first. We knew that the Bay Area Air District had already built a really good model. Here is their prediction of where pollution from local sources would disperse across West Oakland. In their model, they had a whole team of people that did a giant inventory of all these different sources of pollution, and they made sure the numbers they used for those sources were really well vetted. And this is important because if the pollution level that you're inputting into your model isn't accurate, your output is not going to be accurate either. So if the air district's model is so good, why can't we just use that? Well, for a few reasons. One is the scale of the model is very different from the scale that we want to work at. They are looking at how pollution moves across a city. That information is really great for identifying problem areas, but we want to zoom in and look at things that are happening at the city block level. A larger scale model might tell you the general direction of the wind, which is useful to know. But if you zoomed into the scale of the neighborhood, there are areas behind buildings where wind is blocked. And the larger model is not necessarily going to capture that. So we want to use the information from the air district's model, but we're going to try to use additional data to fill in where those gaps might be. The air district's model also doesn't include vegetation, which we're specifically trying to see how vegetation intercepts pollution. So it's important for us to do this. After we figure out the pollution levels that we want to model, we have to think about how the wind is moving. So we can use different wind stations around Oakland that are measuring the direction and the speed of the wind. In general, wind in Oakland is coming from the west or southwest and moving east. We use this to create what's called a wind field map, which tells us how the wind would move around buildings and trees. So the picture on the right is an example of a wind field map. And the darker areas behind the buildings are areas where the buildings are blocking the wind. So the air is moving slower. The areas that are lighter is where the wind and the air is moving faster as it's getting kind of pushed around structures. And then the arrows are showing the direction that the wind is moving. So once we have the digital version of the physical world, the way the wind is moving and how much pollution is coming from what locations, we can combine this all together and look at how the air moves pollution through the world. So we're going to take simplified versions of the vegetative buffers for each project area and put those in the model and then test them. And that's how we're going to try to answer the question of whether a vegetative buffer in any of these areas would have an impact. So here's some quick key takeaways. Models use inputs to make predictions. They aren't always accurate, but they're still useful. We are trying to make our inputs as accurate as possible so we can get more accurate results. And we are developing models that can test the differences between planting interventions. So in our first round of simulations, we compared different scenarios. So in the table to the left, you can see the different scenarios that we tested. One of our first tests was to test how the pollution moved through existing conditions. So that's testing the vegetation that already exists in the world. We always test existing conditions first so that we have something to compare our later simulations to. And you can see what the digital version of the existing vegetation looked like on the right. And then we compared that to a scenario where the vegetative buffers are planted on Caltrans land and in the immediately plantable area along frontage. And you can see that we've added vegetative buffers to the model on the right. So here's what they look like side by side. You can see we've created these simplified vegetative buffers. And this is what the results look like. The visualization on the right shows where the pollution is better or worse compared to existing conditions. So I'm going to zoom in here. The blue areas are showing us where there's less pollution concentration than existing conditions, so how things are right now. And then the darker areas are showing more pollution concentration. One of the things we're seeing in our preliminary models is that having trees along the freeway blocks pollution from moving as freely towards the neighborhood. We think that it's being deposited onto the trees a little bit, but it's also trapping the pollution near the freeway. Because no one lives in the middle of the freeway lane, and this is probably isn't a bad thing. People in their cars are usually driving with their windows up, and even if they weren't, passing through an area with high pollution is not the same risk as living in that pollution every day. Here's a view of that area from the side. The purple area is showing where we've taken this side view from. From the side, you can see that the pollution is concentrating and then pluming at the freeway. But the neighborhood is 15% better. As you move away from the buffer, you're gonna see less of that positive effect. So I think the main takeaway from this is that our models are showing us that blocking pollution from moving somewhere does mean that it may be collecting where you're blocking it. The next scenario combined Caltrans and an early road diet design. These were some of our early road diet concepts. The option that we're testing in this round of simulations was option 1, where the planters were between lanes. We also tested option 3 at the end, which is there's a big planter to one side. The results of these simulations ended up influencing how we developed our road diet concepts, which I'm going to describe later on. We tested an option where it was just the road diet by itself. We tested the immediately plantable area just by itself, Caltrans just by itself. And finally, we did a version where we put all of them together. For this version of the road diet, we tested what it would look like to have a vegetative buffer on one side of the road instead of the smaller one between lanes. And here's a comparison of which of these buffers performed the best in our simulation. So all of the areas having a buffer was the most effective. The second most effective was Caltrans, an immediately plantable area planted. And then the third place option was the immediately plantable area by itself. So here are some of the key takeaways from doing this first round of simulations. We took digital versions of vegetative buffers in different planting areas and compared those to baseline conditions to see where the pollution would be improved and where it would be worsened. Pollution concentration is higher in front of the buffer, it's lower behind the buffer, and the positive effect of the buffer eventually diminishes downwind. The immediately plantable area had a noticeable effect, and it's also the simplest place. So we want to push to plant there as soon as we can. So after we did this first round of simulations, we learned a lot and decided we would try to improve our models for the next round. So we did this in 3 ways. We switched softwares, we got better data, and we expanded the area that we would be looking at. So we wanted to switch software so that we could allow for more customization, so that we could use mathematics to better account for real world phenomena. We wanted to look at things like turbulence. So that's how the air is expected to move and how it mixes. We also wanted to incorporate vehicle-induced turbulence. That's the way that the air will move around vehicles that are moving very fast. We also wanted to use software that could better represent the way that particulates deposit on vegetation and how vegetation would calm the flow of air, push it upward, and collect particulates. We also wanted to incorporate better traffic data. So after our first round of models, we were able to get traffic counts from major roads in the project area. The traffic counts break vehicles down into categories like small passenger cars, medium-sized trucks, and large trucks. It's really helpful to know how many of which type of vehicle are generally traveling on the road, because different vehicles emit different amounts of PM 2.5 due to differences in the type of fuel that they burn and how heavy the vehicle is. This provided us with a more refined estimate of the pollution coming from the roadways. We were also able to show the Air District our first models and use their feedback to improve our approach. And then finally, we wanted to expand the area we were looking at. Our first round of models, we were developing and refining our airflow or our workflow. We mostly concentrated on that area to the left. But once we had figured out how we wanted to do our models and how we could improve them, we wanted to apply what we learned to a larger area. And we're going to use our more improved modeling techniques to develop the road design, the road diet concept designs. I'm going to talk about those later on, but first, I just wanted to check if anyone had any questions about modeling. Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so moving right along. So we saw in those initial models that the planting along frontage road could be really impactful as a first defense against air pollution. So getting this area planted right away is a priority. So let's take a look at what we are capable of planting in this area. So this is that immediately plantable area. And so here is a look at all the places that we looked at as potential planting sites along this roadway. We started by seeing if we could plant all of these strips, and then we narrowed things down based on a few things. One was how could we get water to the site? That's a big one. How could we go about permitting it is another. And then another big limiting factor is the budget. Like, what are we capable of planting with the budget that we do have? So we created initial planting plans for the entire area to see what it would cost to for the plants and materials such as mulch and soil amendments, and how much it would cost to repair the irrigation. And the estimated cost was around $1 million. We didn't have $1 million, so we decided we'd try to plant out as much as we could with the budget that we do have. So the areas in red are the areas we decided to eliminate. Getting water across frontage road was more difficult. There's also no, the area to the far right in front of that old abandoned train station. There aren't any water hookups in front of that area. And so in order to connect the water there, we'd have to tear up the street, which is more costly and also more complicated from a permitting perspective. The areas where we wanted to work were all within the city's property. And so the ownership kind of behind the sound wall to the far right was a little more complicated. And this is also an area where we would already be doing that planting in the front of the sound wall. And so we weren't going to prioritize it as much as the other areas. So here are the areas we want to move forward with. There is an area above the walls along frontage road. And there's this kind of area further north as the road rises where we can infill a lot more trees and replace some of the dying redwoods. We can, along here, anywhere where we can be filling in more trees, we can be planting shrubs. As we move north, there's these large areas. There's still large areas where that can receive a lot of trees. And so our plan is to, fill in gaps. Some of the areas in front of the apartments already have trees. And so we just want to fill those in more to make a denser buffer. And then this kind of furthest area up north has the most trees already. And so we're going to prioritize trying to get a lot into those lower areas first where there isn't as much tree cover. And here we're just going to thicken the buffer as much as our budget allows. So here are some of the tree species that we're looking at. All of these trees are evergreen. They are thick and they grow in these really nice hedge-like formations. And then we have some shrub species here. We've chosen really thick evergreen shrubs that have flowers or berries that can support native pollinators and birds. And so after we've added the trees and the shrubs, the area is going to be watered with a newly repaired irrigation system. So trees and shrubs need supplemental water, especially during the summer months, especially in California, until they have become established. And once those root systems are established, they can usually survive on their own without much supplemental water. We will also have 3 years of establishment maintenance. The first few years is really important so that you can prune trees properly to shape how they're going to grow later on. And so here is an example of our latest planting plan. We are hoping to begin planting this area next month. So we have gotten our initial list reviewed by the city. Those were some of the trees and shrubs that I've showed you, and we're currently working on just like getting the water turned onto the area and getting ready to fix the irrigation system. So I just wanted to pause before going on to talk about the road diet designs and just see if anyone had any comments or feedback about the immediately plantable area.
Heather, go for it.
Thanks, Nicole. This is amazing work. Thank you. I just had one question in terms of like these barriers in some of the modeling causing pooling, say in like the freeway or the road area. How does that concentrated pollution actually affect the trees and the green life that we were putting there in order to create a barrier? Like over time, is there degradation or, yeah, just curious about that.
Yeah, so there are different tree species that tend to do better or worse with city air pollution. And so a lot of the tree species that are more sensitive to the air pollution of the city of Oakland just won't let us plant those for good reason. And so, yeah, we've eliminated a lot of the more sensitive species from our list.
Got it. Thanks.
Is there anything that neighbors or partners want to see in addition to the immediately plannable area? Or is there anything that we're missing? We know what, or we think we know what we're doing right, but what else might we need to consider? Alexis?
Yeah, I think this is amazing information. I'm connected with Oak Center Cultural Center, and I'm really excited to even learn that this is happening in West Oakland. We've been waiting for something like this to happen for a very long time. I think a street that we're attached to that's very popular is Adeline. And I've wondered how the freeway, since there's so many freeways right there or close by, how that is affecting the air quality. I think just wondering if there's like a 10-year plan or something to where it infiltrates the rest of West Oakland, at least within that 1 mile radius of the highways, and in general, just greenery and filtration and beautification. Is that anywhere in the conversation? If not, that's okay too. I just figured I'd ask.
Yeah, it definitely is. And so one of the other projects that we're coordinating with WOAP on is the STEP project. And so in that project, we're cooperating with the Oakland Parks and Rec Foundation. They do a lot of tree planting, and then the Department of Transportation to plant a bunch of trees around Oakland. And so actually, I think the Oak Center site, we are trying to add some trees there. So
I'm so
excited about that.
Very, very grateful.
Yeah, so we are pushing, and us, WOAP, OPRF, we're all trying to push for there to be more trees and greening in Oakland in general. One of the big things that we're running into often is that it's very difficult to the city is often overstretched when it comes to the maintenance of trees. And so we're trying to work with various organizations to put together like a coalition of community members and groups that can help steward trees in Oakland.
Great.
And so we have a a stewardship coalition right now that's meeting. We also have different groups that are trying to gather volunteers, both for planting and for stewardship. And so that, if that piece can become easier, then it will be a lot easier to get permission to plant more trees.
That's amazing. Yeah, if there's information where Oak Center can be a partner in that, where one of our probably our best assets is people that like to volunteer. So if there's a way where we can get more information so we can communicate that for a long-term plan, because especially Adeline, and we're right behind the park, you know, there's a lot of maintenance that's needed. But we don't know really what to do, and we didn't really know who to connect with. So that would be amazing to know how we can be a part of that coalition and things like that. So
yeah, absolutely. I can definitely connect you with some people and information on that.
Paul?
Yeah, thank you. Well, so first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for all your work on this. I think the presentation today and all the work on this project has been amazing. I love the data modeling informed approach. I think it's all incredible. I know a lot of community members are really, really excited to see this project move forward. One thing, the only thing that I wanted to call out, suggest, don't know if it could be considered either in the interim short term or for the future, is would love to see some greenery that could be kind of multi-impactful, in that greenery that drapes down on frontage to hide or cover graffiti, especially the portion closer to 7th. And I think maybe that was even in some like mock-ups with regard to the Prescott Greening Project early on. So I know obviously, right, the number one consideration should of course be pollution mitigation, but to the extent that something could hit multiple bases and also do that, I think that would be amazing, since that has been an ongoing issue, and Oakland has, you know, doesn't really have the funds and hasn't been able to keep up with maintaining that corner in particular.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So actually I have added a couple vines to the design. I'm hoping that they do well. They're kind of, you know, we have more faith in the trees and the shrubs, but hopefully there's going to be some flowered vines hanging down. I don't know if they'll cover the graffiti, but yeah, some of that will hopefully get incorporated.
One of the things I'm concerned about, I'm working with Common Vision and a gentleman named Daniel. And I'd like to know, I'm a garden educator. I'd like to know what training is available for the community so that we can go ahead and plant these trees in Oakland. So I'm concerned about that, because you want to teach your community about trees so that they have a connection and maintain the continuation of it, even after 3 years at some point. So the community needs to be educated in planting the trees and knowing a little bit about the different trees that you are planting. Some of the schools are planting what they call London plane trees, you know, and Chinese elms. So it's so important that we have that knowledge, and that the organizations will be educating those who are planting the trees to have some knowledge. Because Canopy has a wonderful program. They're in Palo Alto, and they have an excellent program of educating the community and getting volunteers to come in and plant the trees. Mm-hmm. So I like to see that happening in Oakland as well. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you for that comment. I think that's a great idea, and I know some of the subcommittees on STEP are trying to figure out ways to create educational materials and try to bring community members more into that. And so I would both love to connect you to those groups, and then also in general, I'm totally on board. I think that it's really important for us to have a tree culture. Otherwise, yeah, trees just don't get taken care of. They get ignored and they end up dying. and we get a lot of London planes. So, okay.
So you would connect me with that? I might be already connected, but I want to make sure that I am in tune to this because plants are my love, and I work with them for over two decades or more now in various projects in the community. Mhm.
Yeah, I can connect you. You can either reach out to me personally, I'm may@hyphy.net, but also I think Common Vision is getting involved in these subcommittees, which is great because they're incredible. They're a great member of the tree planting community and do so much great work. And so Derek or Wanda also would definitely be able to connect you to these committees.
Okay. Well, I am working now with Common Vision, so it seems that I'm on the right track.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there's so many organizations and so much going on. I'm trying to put it all in one perspective to where I could fit and be the most serving in the community. Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Marcus, I see your hand.
Thank you. My question has to do with some information that was provided early on around asthma and the admission rates and all those things. What's your source of the data?
Um, I believe for the asthma related things, it was the Pacific Research Institute where I got that information. And then as far as like the emission levels, we're using data from the Air District and the kind of catalog of sources that they have, and that helps us with locations and then also different kind of categories of and classes of pollution, and then traffic counts to better estimate things directly off of frontage and the two freeways or the two freeway directions.
Thank you.
And a good portion of these health statistics that WOBE often shares, we get much of that data also from the Alameda County Public Health Department. And I dropped the 5-year report, the WOCAP 5-year progress report. It's a light read at about 90 plus pages. So for those of you who are interested, but it does have all of the sources that we are referring to ground truth that for everyone.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I'd love to present a little bit more about the road diet stuff, and then we'll have some time at the end for any other like discussion that people want to have. Okay, so finally, I get to talk about the road diet. So first I want to talk about some of the traffic data we got and how that ended up influencing our designs. And then I'm going to show you the new concept designs. So we got this new traffic data that allowed us to see how many vehicles were moving on these major roads. And the major roads with the highest traffic counts were frontage road and the north and southbound lanes of the freeway. So in the Air District's model, you can see where these road segments are because they are a significant source of pollution. This graph shows a comparison of the total traffic counts on these roads split into light duty vehicles, so that's passenger cars, and trucks. This is for 1 p.m. on a weekday. And each lane of the freeway has a much higher total number of cars compared to frontage road. So here is the amount of PM 2.5 concentration at pedestrian level as you move from the freeway towards the neighborhood. So pollution spikes at the source area, so like the freeways or the frontage road, And then it slowly kind of disperses as it merges with all of the, above the air above and the local pollution, the background pollution, basically. So I like this graph because it's showing that the total amount of PM 2.5 concentration from each of those source areas. So this shows how big of a difference we're seeing between frontage and the freeways. It also reveals some interesting nuance about the difference between car and truck emissions. So let me show you what I mean. So we're showing the pollution from trucks and cars as separate lines. The darker line is always the truck pollution. The lighter line is for cars. And then there's 3 different areas represented by the 3 different colors. So we have a blue spike, and that's car and truck pollution coming from the southbound lane of the freeway. Then we see a green spike representing truck and car pollution coming from the northbound lane. And then we see an orange spike representing frontage. So for both of the freeway lanes, the cars are contributing more pollution than the trucks. But you can see that the dark orange line on frontage is the trucks, which is higher than the light orange line representing the cars. But if you'll remember, trucks actually made up a smaller portion of the vehicle count on frontage road. So why are trucks contributing more to the emissions? That's because burning diesel is an order of magnitude worse than compared to gasoline burning cars. And so you can see that in this table. Here, we're breaking down vehicle operational emissions. So that's the emissions that are coming from actively operating a vehicle per distance traveled. So these emissions are either coming from the exhaust, so that's coming from the engine, it's coming out of the tailpipe, or from the natural wear that happens to the brakes and the tires as the car drives, which is also a source of emissions. So for small passenger cars that are burning gasoline, the exhaust makes up only around 17% of the operational emissions, and the rest is actually the brake and tire wear. For trucks that are burning diesel, the exhaust is contributing 44 to 47% of the particulate matter coming from the vehicle, which is a bigger proportion. So that's why on frontage road, the trucks are contributing slightly more to the overall pollution spike, even though they had a smaller number. So this table compares the total amount of PM 2.5 as you're moving from the freeway to the neighborhood, except this time it's broken down by source rather than location. So each line is representing either the brake and tire wear or the running exhaust for either trucks or passenger cars. So the biggest overall contribution of PM 2.5 we're seeing is the black line, and that's the brake and tire wear from passenger cars. The next biggest source is the brake and tire wear and exhaust from trucks. You can see those levels are pretty similar. And then the smallest contributor, that light gray line, is the running exhaust from passenger cars. So this means that even if we eventually switch all of the cars to electric, only that light gray line is going to disappear. The rest of the PM 2.5 pollution is going to remain pretty high. So what can we take away from this? One, the majority of the pollution is coming from the freeway rather than frontage road. The emissions being produced by the freeway are primarily passenger cars, whereas along frontage, the emissions are primarily trucks. As we are designing the road diet, we wanted to take this into account and be really careful about trying to buffer the freeway as well as we could, while not disregarding the contributions of frontage road to pollution totals. Number two, brake and tire wear are actually the highest contributors of PM 2.5 for both passenger vehicles and trucks. So much that even if you suddenly made every passenger vehicle on the road electric, you'd only remove around 10% of the PM 2.5 concentration. So we should still be looking for long-term mitigation strategies. All right, so we had we used this information to develop the designs. We had these original concept designs for the road diet that we used for our initial models. And while we did see some effect from that option 1 that we modeled, it wasn't as much of an impact as we'd like to see from what ultimately is going to be a multi-million-dollar project. We also had an initial feedback meeting with the West Oakland Community Action Plan Committee, and people really preferred the third option. So we decided that we wanted to explore a planter on one side for our designs. We also saw from that traffic data, we really have to prioritize blocking pollution coming from the freeway in our designs. So wouldn't having a big buffer along frontage road be blocking the pollution from the freeway anyway? Well, in most places, but there are some places where there would be gaps in the buffer at intersections. So not only are you going to have a gap in where there's the intersection, but you also have to reduce the buffer thickness at those places in order to accommodate sight lines. A sight line is basically an area that has to have a clear line of sight from where the driver is to some distance down the road. This is so the driver can see things before they pull out into the road. And that's a really important safety consideration. So the length of that sight distance, so how much clearance that you need, depends on the speed of the road. So, I mean, believe it or not, the speed limit of the frontage actually is 35, but we theoretically only need a clear sight triangle that goes 250 feet down the road. But because people are driving closer to 40 or 50 miles an hour, a sight line closer to 300 to 360 feet would actually be a lot better. And so in those places, we have to make the buffer either thinner, like setting it back from the road, or shorter. So this happens in 3 places along frontage. We do want to have vegetative buffers along the Caltrans land eventually as well, but there's unfortunately gaps in the plantable sections of Caltrans as well, where there's just no open soil. It's just paved over, and there isn't a lot of room. And so the way that we design the road diet could try to compensate for gaps at the intersections and gaps along Caltrans land. So a buffer on the eastern side, so that's the side with the neighborhood on it, would block both the freeway and frontage road, but you'd have gaps. A buffer on the western side wouldn't block frontage at all, but it would effectively block the freeway, which is a source of the majority of the pollution. And so if only there was a way for us to compare these buffers to see which one would work better. Well, that's exactly what we did. So in our next round of models, that's what we wanted to compare. So we did simulations for the entire area along frontage road, but we especially are interested in what's happening at these intersections at 10th and 14th, where the gaps in the eastern buffer would be. So here's that intersection at 10th. On the left, we have that eastern buffer, and on the right, we have a western buffer. So here's what the wind model looks like when you have an eastern buffer. Notice the way that the wind is moving through that gap. And here's what it looks like when we add pollution to that. So the brown and orange area is where the pollution is worse than if there was no buffer at all. And the lighter blue is where there's less pollution. So because the wind is speeding up as it's flowing through the buffer, it's sending a plume of pollution through the buffer, and that's going right into the neighborhood. But right behind the buffer where the pedestrians would be walking is 15% better. Here's the wind speed simulation for a western buffer. The wind slows down behind the buffer, which is where frontage road is. So let's look at how that impacts the pollution. So you could see that the western buffer blocks the pollution that's coming from the freeway. So the freeway is worse than it was without the buffer. And that buffer is also slowing down the air on frontage and doesn't block the pollution there. So the frontage road is going to have worse pollution concentrations, but the air from frontage road isn't actually moving towards the neighborhood as much due to that decrease in wind speed. So in the neighborhood, we're seeing less pollution than if we didn't have a buffer, even though we aren't getting any pollution coming off of frontage. But it's not great for pedestrians who are walking along frontage. It is kind of better for the neighborhood at large. So here's a comparison of what that looks like in section. The pollution is pluming over the neighborhood in both. We do want to try to plant the area around Caltrans eventually. And so we also wanted to see what would happen if we added Caltrans buffers to our model. So when we look at Caltrans with the eastern buffer together, we do still see pollution escaping through that gap at 10th, but it's much smaller than before. Here's a comparison. Here's the eastern buffer by itself compared with the eastern buffer combined with a planting along Caltrans. The western buffer has similar results. There's even more of a decrease in PM 2.5 in the neighborhood in this version. And so here's that comparison of the western buffer by itself, and then comparing that with the western buffer combined with a planting along Caltrans. You can see that we are seeing more pollution being picked up. So let's compare all these scenarios. The eastern and western buffers by themselves are green. The eastern and western buffer combined with Caltrans is in blue. The western buffer is light blue and light green. The eastern buffer is dark blue and dark green. So this bar graph is showing the difference in PM 2.5 concentration for each of these scenarios as we move spatially from the freeway to the neighborhood. So we have the sample locations first at the freeway along the north and the southbound lanes. Then we have frontage road. Then we have right inside the neighborhood and then deeper into the neighborhood. So at the freeway, the pollution is spiking because pollution is being trapped there by the buffer. At frontage road, this pollution spikes for the eastern buffer because we're trapping pollution there, but the pollution is lower for the two western buffers. There's still pollution on frontage for those western buffers, but it's just technically lower than existing conditions because we're removing all of that additional pollution that would be coming from the freeway. And then once we get into the neighborhood, the eastern buffer combined with Caltrans, that's having the biggest reduction in PM 2.5 concentration. But when we move deeper into the neighborhood and you're picking up some of that plume that's coming through, both the western buffers are creating bigger reductions. So that was 10th Street, but will we see different results at 14th? So, as you get closer to 14th, the freeway starts to rise up as we move north, and it's so that it can kind of jump the railroad and head towards the Bay Bridge. So up near 14th, here's the eastern buffer by itself. We're seeing a little bit of pollution coming through that gap, but it's a lot less than before. And when we add the Caltrans buffer, the improvement for pollution here is really significant. So here's a comparison of the eastern buffer by itself and the eastern buffer combined with Caltrans. And you can see, it's more significant of an improvement, but it's a lot more of an improvement compared to at 10th Street. Here's the western buffer by itself. So we aren't really seeing the same level of improvement that we saw previously. And we think that's because the freeway is rising up. And so the western buffer just isn't having that same impact at pedestrian level. And when we add the Caltrans buffer, we are seeing a more significant decrease for the western buffer. So here's the western buffer by itself compared to the western buffer combined with a Caltrans planting. So when we compare all these scenarios again, once again, we're sampling at pedestrian level, moving away from the freeway towards the neighborhood. So because the freeway is rising up, we're not really going to be seeing the spike at the freeway that we saw before. We see a huge spike at frontage road. And there, the eastern buffer is causing the most significant spike because it's trapping pollution on the road and keeping it from hitting pedestrians. And then once we get into the neighborhood, the eastern buffer is doing a much better job of removing PM 2.5 concentrations just across the board. And combining buffers with Caltrans is the most effective in each case as well. All right, so let's move on to our concept designs. So these simulations really significantly impacted our concept designs. We decided that our final proposal would be a hybrid between the eastern and western buffer to try to capture the benefits of both of these approaches. The western buffer can buffer the freeway at the most critical points to try to maximize the benefits to air quality. And the eastern buffer in the northern area can create a visual and sound separation between the frontage road and the densely populated apartment buildings. So let's take a look at these. So starting at 7th and frontage, we have a buffer on both sides of the road before it widens and becomes the western buffer further up. We also have low planters on 7th, protecting a pedestrian and bike lane. 7th Street is one of the few access points to the Middle Harbor Shoreline Park, which is one of Oakland's supported bike destinations. So we wanted to leave a lot of room on 7th for bicycles and pedestrians. As I mentioned before, 7th, where frontage meets 7th, it dips down to go under the freeway. And so this creates an area of really low elevation. And if you zoom out on an elevation map, like I do in the bottom right, you can see that this is actually the lowest area in all of West Oakland. So this dip means that water collects here sometimes during rainstorms, and flooding at this intersection could be a really big problem for emergency situations. So as the street descends, we're proposing that planters on either side could be used as bioswales. So the water can flow into the planters and keep the street from flooding. And that water could then potentially maybe get saved and pumped back out to use as irrigation later on. And so then up the road, we've reduced the number of lanes, but at the 7th Street intersection, we've kept 3 turn lanes. We looked at traffic count data, and we really wanted to make sure that we wouldn't be creating issues with trucks being backed up along frontage road waiting for the light. So we created these additional, we didn't take away any of the turn lanes. So here is what the street looks like right now at the frontage and 7th intersection. And here is a rendering of what we've proposed. So you can see that there is a low planter that is protecting the bike and pedestrian path on 7th. Up frontage, there are these stepped planters that would have, inlets, and then we could put trees in those planters. And then there is 1 lane going onto frontage and 3 turn lanes coming off of frontage. So then as we move north, those turn lanes end and that extra space gets taken up by that expanding western buffer. Now there's 1 lane going in each direction and a lane in the middle just to accommodate turns. And once we hit the apartment buildings, the buffer transitions over to the eastern side. And so here is a view of the existing street. We've got 2 lanes in each direction and an unused middle lane. And then here is that exact same spot with a rendered concept design. So now there's 1 lane in each direction. That extra space is taken up by trees. And then we have, the middle lane just being used for a turn lane. Here is a view from above. We've got that freeway, then frontage road, and then the apartment buildings. And then here's our rendering from above. We're still working on rendering those apartment buildings, but you can see that now we have trees between the apartments and the road, and then there's leftover area there for pedestrians. So here is what it might look like for pedestrians in the area. Would most likely be a much more pleasant place to walk. So we covered a lot of ground today. We have 3 major areas where planting projects could help intercept pollution before it gets into the neighborhood. We want to use vegetated buffers to do that. We use models to see if planting the buffers in any of these project areas would have an impact on pollution. We want to plant that immediately plantable area along frontage because the models are showing it's going to have an impact and it's the fastest and easiest place to start. When we were taking a closer look at pollution data, we could see that the freeway was the biggest source. So we compared the results of an eastern or western buffer along frontage to see what would be the most impactful. And that led us to developing the concept that uses both an eastern and western buffer. So our hope is that designs like these could improve the experience of the people who use this road and also make the neighborhood a healthier place to live. So yeah, thank you. That was a lot of information. Thanks so much for listening. And I wanted to open the floor for questions or discussion.
May, that was beautiful. All of it. Thank you. Quick clarification. So the road diet is one of my favorite pieces of Prescott greening, right? Because it shows what it can be. And the current challenge that we are facing is that a road diet roughly costs about $20 million. We're working on it, but it's still $20 million. And this is why the collaboration, not only with Hy-Vee, but with the city of Oakland, Caltrans, and specifically the Port of Oakland is extremely, extremely important because these are the agencies that can actually make this happen, right? And residents, partners, just anyone that's interested in Oakland's well-being, letting everyone and anyone who has any sort of pull in this process, right, including our city council, to know that this is important, I truly believe will make a difference. And the current expectation for completing a road diet, assuming we came across $20 million, is about 3 years, which sounds pretty reasonable for a large project like that. May, do you mind showing that last slide again? That to me is extremely fantastic, that possibility. I live in West Oakland. I've been here 15 years, and I always have to remind myself that this is showing what frontage road in my neighborhood could look like. I'm going to open the floor. We can start donations now or just questions. Heather, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is amazing, super interesting. I'm curious about when you're talking about stakeholders who are important, like if there's a way, I'm a physician, and so like, is there a way to include like local healthcare organizations like maybe Kaiser, because they have such a big presence in Oakland, in advocating, and like you could model the health data of like exposures of kids to emissions now versus after implementation, and what that would mean in terms of like emergency room visits, lifelong asthma, all these, or like to pregnant women and like preterm labor, and like that could be really compelling data both to like a health insurer like Kaiser. I don't know. I mean, they have a lot of money right now, supposedly, you know. So yeah, I think both for pitching it to say like city folks, but also to other stakeholders.
Absolutely. We are working with Baywell, or with the West Oakland Health Center, right? And a larger partner, right? Especially for a longitudinal study, right?
Yeah.
Kaiser would be extremely important there, right? And we know that additional stakeholders are needed, right? So educators, right? Parents, right? No one cares about your kid more than you do, right?
Yeah.
And their well-being. Industry, like businesses, small business owners, the ballers, right? Everyone has a vested interest in this, right? I mentioned specifically Caltrans, the city of Oakland, and the Port of Oakland because they control right away. They control those things. And as much as I believe that data can move the dial, we need those three partners invested first. Oh, they got named first.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
We have Radia and Colleen from the Port of Oakland here. And just curious, oh, Laura, you're here too. Man, this is perfect. Big question is, what additional information is needed from Hyphy, from WOA, from residents in order to move something like a road diet forward?
Good evening. This is Colleen, Director of Environmental Programs and Planning. It's a great question, Nicole. Thank you for inviting us to this meeting. A lot of it is, to your point, is collaboration that between City of Oakland and Caltrans. Yes, the port has, and I may be incorrect, Radia, correct me if I'm wrong. We don't own the streets, but we have some easements. I know not onto frontage road, but we really do have brought this project up to the City of Oakland and Caltrans. So we have been in conversation with them and how we can move this dial and move this project forward. You know, things that we at the port looking at is like grant funding opportunities. I heard, you know, this is millions and millions of dollars. And so, you know, looking at funding opportunities where the community or residents can't be the lead applicant, but the port, or, you know, if we don't own the road, we would partner with City of Oakland for them to be the lead, and we would help move the dial and this project forward. So that's how we've been working. And, you know, as this project has progressed, seems like it's really progressed, and it was a great presentation. It was very awesome to learn more about this project. So I think, to your point, Nicole, it really is a continued collaboration. And you're right, it is something that the port and the city and Caltrans have to discuss and on how we can make this happen.
Thanks, Colleen. I really appreciate that transparency, and I will schedule a meeting for those 3 agencies very soon. And
yeah,
hopefully we can
welcome. Yeah,
get
welcome
moving.
to continue to discuss this with the other agencies.
Really appreciate it. Any questions? I mean, the presentation was terrific, and it's a lot of information. I want to make sure that folks have what they need to not only be excited, but to say, hey, I understand what this can do, and I understand what it's not going to do at the end of 2025. So the estimated timing to complete the initial planting area is the end of the year, Paul. So you'll probably see us out there, probably, I mean, not me specifically planting, but I'll be watching. Yeah, end of 2025. Well, we'll stay on, and thanks everyone for spending time with us and joining us this evening. You could be anywhere else, and we appreciate that you're here.